Have you ever sat quietly at your kitchen table, coffee in hand, wondering what your next chapter might look like? Maybe your house feels a little too quiet these days. Maybe the chores are getting harder, or maybe you've caught yourself thinking, wouldn't it be nice to live closer to family? Maybe even move in with the kids? If that thought has ever crossed your mind, you're not alone, and you're certainly not wrong for wanting connection, support, or simplicity in this phase of life. But here's the truth. Some choices that look comforting at first can carry hidden costs we never expected. Let me tell you about Linda. She was 67 when she decided to sell her home and move in with her daughter Karen and Karen's family. On paper, it sounded like a dream. They'd save money, help each other, and grow even closer. This will be perfect, Linda told herself. And for the first few weeks, it was. Shared dinners, laughter with the grandkids, a full house again. But by the end of month 3, that warmth had cooled into silence and tension. Linda felt invisible in the house she now called home. Karen, meanwhile, was overwhelmed with caregiving tasks she hadn't anticipated, driving to appointments, handling prescriptions, and juggling household needs. Neither of them saw it coming. Neither of them knew how to talk about it once it began. And just like that, a beautiful relationship began to fray at the edges. This is not a story to scare you. It's one to prepare you. Because the truth is, moving in with your adult children after 60 can either strengthen the bond you've spent decades building or quietly unravel it. What makes the difference is awareness, boundaries, and honest planning. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Let's start with the first and perhaps most painful nightmare that many older adults experience once they've given up their own home: the loss of independence and dignity. Now, I want you to imagine something. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that everything in your day, when you eat, when you go out, even when you watch TV, needs to be coordinated with someone else's schedule. Not because you can't do it on your own, but because you're now a guest in a home that's not yours. You feel that subtle need to check in before making decisions you used to make without a second thought. That's what happened to Frank. He was 71, a retired accountant, proud of his ability to manage a household. After his wife passed, he moved in with his son's family thinking it would be temporary, just until he figured out the next step. But weeks turned into months, and he found himself slowly disappearing into the background of his own life. I felt like I needed permission to use the kitchen, he told me. I didn't want to be in the way. I stopped going into the living room altogether because that was their space. And that right there, that's where the quiet erosion of self begins. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's those tiny moments of feeling like you no longer have a place where you can just be you. It's important to understand that independence isn't just about physical ability. It's about having the freedom to make your own choices, to move through your day with agency and confidence. When that starts to disappear, so does your sense of identity. But it doesn't have to be that way. The solution isn't to avoid moving in altogether. It's to plan for autonomy before you walk through that door with a suitcase. One of the best things you can do is create a written agreement that clearly lays out your independence. What spaces are yours? What hours are your own? Can you come and go freely? Can you have friends over? These things might feel uncomfortable to discuss at first, but believe me, it's much more uncomfortable when it's left unsaid. You've lived a life full of decisions. Don't give up that power now. The key is to move in as a partner, not a passive resident. Now let's talk about something that most families tiptoe around: money. Because the second nightmare that unfolds in this new living arrangement is financial tension, and it creeps in faster than you might think. Money is funny, isn't it? We don't like to talk about it. We don't want to be a burden, and we don't want to seem greedy. But when it comes to shared living, silence about finances can be a silent wrecking ball. Take Nancy, for example. She moved in with her daughter's family at 72. She offered to help with groceries and paid a little toward utilities. But no one really discussed the numbers. She wasn't sure if she was helping enough, and her daughter didn't want to ask for more. Under the surface, resentment began to build. Then one day, a $300 electric bill sparked a shouting match. Not because of the money itself, but because of all the unspoken assumptions that had stacked up over time. Nancy told me, I felt like a burden, but also like I was being taken advantage of. And that was the worst part. I didn't know what they expected. Here's the truth. Financial tension doesn't come from the amount of money. It comes from the lack of clarity. That's why you need a detailed financial plan before you ever move in. What are you contributing? Is it a set amount each month? Are you paying for groceries, utilities, rent, or something else? Who makes decisions about big expenses, repairs, upgrades, emergency costs? And don't just make a plan once and forget it. Revisit it. Sit down together every few months to make sure it still works for everyone. Life changes, bills shift, and unexpected costs happen. Communication needs to be ongoing. Money can either bring you together or quietly pull you apart. The difference lies in honesty. And speaking of things that quietly pull us apart, that brings me to the third emotional undercurrent that turns this arrangement from support to sorrow. It's the slow, heartbreaking shift in your relationship with your child, from parent and friend to caregiver and dependent. And that change is often permanent. Robert's story sticks with me. He was a proud, funny, sharp-witted man in his late 60s when he had a minor stroke. After recovery, he moved in with his daughter Emily while he regained his strength. At first, she was happy to help. She loved her dad. But as the weeks turned into months, their relationship began to morph. She stopped calling him dad and started calling him you, in that clipped tone caregivers sometimes use without meaning to. Their conversations stopped being about life and laughter and became about meds, schedules, and doctor's visits. I can't remember the last time we just sat and talked like father and daughter, Robert told me. Now it's just checklists and tension. It wasn't either of their faults. That's the danger. The shift sneaks in. One moment you're making dinner together, and the next you're feeling like a task on their to-do list. The good news is, you can prevent this. You can keep the relationship strong by protecting time together that's not about caretaking. Watch a movie together. Share a meal that's not about meds or appointments. And if there are care needs, consider bringing in outside help, even a few hours a week. That small choice could save your bond. Because here's the truth. No parent wants to become a burden. And no child wants to see their beloved parent fade into a patient. But without boundaries, that's exactly what can happen. Let's pause here for a moment and take a breath. These stories might feel heavy, but they're not meant to scare you. They're meant to empower you. Because you still have choices. You still have time to plan and protect what matters most. Your dignity, your relationships, and your peace of mind. And that journey continues with something just as vital. The way our lifestyles collide when we live under the same roof. Now, let's talk about something most people don't think twice about until they're already in the middle of it. How drastically different lifestyles can feel when you're sharing the same roof. It's one thing to visit for the weekend and quite another to live day in and day out with someone whose rhythm of life no longer matches yours. And it's not always about big disagreements. It's the small daily differences that wear people down. Let me tell you about George. He was 71 and had always been an early riser. For years, his body clock was set to 5 a.m., up with the birds, coffee brewing, news on the TV, ready to start the day. So when he moved in with his daughter's family, he didn't think twice about keeping his routine. But her family was the exact opposite. They were night owls. They stayed up late, watched TV until midnight, and cherished quiet mornings. It didn't take long for those tiny differences to cause friction. George's coffee pot echoed through a quiet house while the rest of the family was still sleeping. Their loud movie nights kept him from falling asleep. The cartoons his grandkids loved in the afternoon clashed with his need for a calm space. At first, everyone tried to be polite, but after a few weeks, the tension was thick. "I felt like a ghost in that house," George told me. "Like every move I made was the wrong one. I even stopped making coffee in the morning just to avoid the eye rolls." And that's how it begins. You start shrinking yourself just to keep the peace. You give up little pieces of your routine thinking it'll help, but what it really does is chip away at your sense of home. Before long, you're staying in your room most of the day, not because you want to, but because you feel like you have no space left that's really yours. The truth is, when two generations live together, there are bound to be differences in lifestyle. But the secret to surviving it, and even thriving in it, is honest, early communication. Before anyone moves in, sit down together and talk through the basics. What time do people usually wake up? When do they eat? Who needs quiet time? Who likes background noise? What does each person need to feel comfortable and respected? It might seem silly to talk about coffee routines or TV volume, but believe me, these little things turn into big things faster than you'd expect. One of the best tools families can create is a shared household calendar or rhythm that acknowledges everyone's routines and needs. And sometimes, simple adjustments, like soundproofing a bedroom door, setting quiet hours, or creating separate TV spaces, can protect your sanity and your relationships. And here's something else that's rarely discussed but deeply important. Compromise is a two-way street. Yes, you're the guest in someone's home, but you're also a whole human being with decades of life behind you. Your habits and preferences matter. Finding middle ground isn't about giving up your identity. It's about making space for everyone to coexist with grace. But even if you get the routines sorted out, and even if everyone bends a little, there's one more layer to consider. And it's a big one: the effect your presence might have on your adult child's marriage. This one is delicate. No one wants to admit it. But it's real, and it's more common than you think. Living under the same roof changes the entire emotional layout of a household. And when an older parent enters that space, especially when it's long-term, it can quietly place strain on even the strongest marriages. Let me tell you about Martha. She moved in with her son Michael and his wife Lisa after selling her home. Michael was all for it. He was excited to have his mom nearby. Lisa was kind and welcoming at first. But after a few months, Martha began noticing small changes. Lisa seemed distant. Conversations were shorter. Eye contact was avoided. And while no one said it aloud, the energy in the house had shifted. "I didn't mean to come between them," Martha said. "I just noticed that Lisa wasn't herself when I was around." Things got worse when Martha overheard them arguing at night about her. Lisa felt judged. She thought her parenting was being critiqued. She felt watched, like she couldn't fully relax in her own home. Michael, caught in the middle, started working late just to avoid the tension. By the time they finally talked it out, the marriage had already taken a hit. Counseling helped. But the pain lingered for months. No one wants to be the reason their child's marriage suffers. But it happens. And it happens more often than we admit. Therapists who work with midlife couples say it clearly. One of the biggest stressors on a marriage is a parent moving in, especially when roles and boundaries aren't crystal clear. The solution? Awareness and space. The healthiest way to support your child without crowding their relationship is by giving them time alone. Make it a rule, not a request, that they get private evenings, weekends, or even whole days that are just for them. Resist the urge to insert yourself into conversations or decisions that belong to the couple. No commentary on how they parent. No suggestions on how they handle their finances or housework, unless you're asked. And even then, tread lightly. If you can afford it, consider separate living spaces within the same property, a basement apartment, an in-law suite, even a granny pod in the backyard. These small shifts in space can make all the difference in preserving emotional privacy and marital peace. And perhaps most importantly, speak with your child and their spouse as a team. Let them know your goal is to support, not to intrude. Tell them you respect their marriage, their parenting style, and their household rhythms. Those few words can ease tension before it even starts. You see, living with adult children isn't doomed. It isn't always dramatic. In fact, for some families, it becomes a beautiful, healing experience. But for that to happen, we must walk in with eyes open and plans in hand. Because love alone isn't always enough. We need boundaries, we need respect, and we need honesty. So much of the pain we've talked about, lost independence, financial tension, damaged relationships, lifestyle clashes, and marital stress, it doesn't come from bad intentions. It comes from unmet expectations, from silence, from hoping things will just work themselves out. They rarely do. But you, watching this now, you have something powerful on your side, foresight. You're thinking ahead. You're asking the right questions. And that alone puts you far ahead of the curve. We're not done yet, though. Because the real takeaway here isn't just what can go wrong, it's how you can make it right. It all comes down to this. After everything we've explored, the fading independence, the quiet financial tensions, the shifting roles in the parent-child relationship, the clashing of daily routines, and the pressure on your child's marriage, there's still one question that matters most. How can you move forward with clarity, confidence, and peace? Because here's the thing, this isn't about convincing you not to move in with your children. It's about making sure you do it the right way, with your eyes open and your heart prepared. That means facing some hard truths now, so you don't face heartbreak later. And if you've made it this far, you already have what it takes. You're thoughtful, you're proactive, and you care deeply, not just about your comfort, but about your family's harmony. That's powerful. So let's talk about how you can avoid each of these 5 nightmares and protect the most precious things you've built over a lifetime: your dignity, your peace, and your relationships. It starts with something most people overlook: your voice. Your ability to speak up for what matters to you before you ever pack a single box. This chapter of your life deserves the same respect and planning as any other big life change. It's not a retreat. It's a realignment. A new path. But it's still your path. You've spent decades making choices, solving problems, building a life. That wisdom doesn't disappear just because you're moving into someone else's home. In fact, it's your greatest asset now. Use it. Make your independence agreement. Sit down and write out the non-negotiables: what time you wake up, what kind of privacy you need, when you need alone time, how often you see friends, and what kind of space makes you feel most like yourself. And then share it. Not like a list of demands, but like a love letter to your future peace. Say, I want this to work. I want to bring joy into your home, not tension. But in order to do that, I need to be honest about what keeps me grounded. They'll appreciate it. And if they don't, then maybe that's your answer. Because the truth is, not every family is meant to live together. And that's okay. You can love someone with your whole heart and still be better off with some healthy space between you. There is no shame in choosing a living arrangement that supports everyone's well-being. In fact, that's the most loving choice you can make. And if you do decide to move in, create a plan for review. Life isn't static. Things change. People change. What works today might not work in 6 months. Make it a family tradition to check in every quarter. Ask each other, how are we feeling about the space? Are the boundaries still working? Is anyone feeling stretched too thin or overlooked? These conversations don't have to be heavy. Sometimes they're just a cup of coffee and a check-in. But they are essential. Silence is the breeding ground for resentment. Honesty is the soil for connection. And here's something else to remember. Don't stop investing in your own life. Just because you're living with family doesn't mean your world should shrink. In fact, it's more important than ever to expand it. Join a community group. Take a class. Go for walks. Make time for friends. volunteer. Whatever lights you up, do more of that. Because your life is still yours. Your joy, your routines, your friendships, they matter deeply. And when you nurture those parts of yourself, you bring more light into the home you share. This is also a time to revisit your purpose. Maybe your purpose used to be raising kids, building a career, or taking care of a spouse. And now? Now it might be sharing wisdom, mentoring younger people, creating beauty, or simply living with peace and presence. You are not a burden. You are a blessing. But that blessing shines brightest when it's whole, not when it's dimmed to fit into someone else's schedule. So protect that light. Protect your voice. Protect your relationships. You've probably noticed that everything we've talked about comes back to boundaries. Not the harsh kind. Not walls. But bridges. Thoughtful, loving bridges that let you stay connected without losing yourself. Boundaries are the invisible lines that keep everyone safe, emotionally, mentally, even spiritually. And when done with love, they don't push people away. They bring people closer. Because people can breathe when they know where the lines are. No one's guessing. No one's tiptoeing. Everyone can just be themselves. It's not too late to have these conversations. Whether you're thinking about moving in, already have, or even if things have gotten a little rocky, there is always time to pause, recenter, and rebuild with intention. One of the most powerful things you can say in any family situation is this: let's talk about what's working and what's not. Because I love you too much to let this fall apart. That sentence alone has saved more relationships than you might imagine. So, as we close out today, I want you to take a deep breath. Really, right now. Breathe in, breathe out, and ask yourself, what do I need to feel free, peaceful, and respected in this next season of life? Write it down. Then ask, how can I share this with my family in a way that invites connection, not conflict? Write that down too, because your story isn't over. It's evolving. And you get to choose how the next chapter goes. You deserve a life where you feel seen, heard, and valued. Not tolerated, not tiptoed around, not silenced. So if this video gave you something to think about, or even the courage to have a conversation you've been avoiding, go ahead and give it a like. It helps more people find these messages. And if you have a story of your own, drop it in the comments. You never know who you might help by sharing your experience. And don't forget to subscribe to Strong Elderly Life. This is a space for honest conversations, practical advice, and the kind of encouragement that reminds you you're not alone. Here's to living your truth, standing in your worth, and creating peace in every room you walk into. You've earned it. Now go live it.